Texas. And man, as if I couldn't tell. You think you
Texas in 1820 was still a majority American Indian. The second largest population demographic was Tejanos, and the third behind that was Anglos, or people of European descent who had immigrated from the United States. At first, the Mexican government encouraged early colonists to the state of Coahuila y Tejas. People like Stephen F. Austin and his family and Jim Bowie moved to the new state hoping to make their fortune. Largely, this material gain was connected to slavery. Originally, Mexico had encouraged this immigration to create a buffer zone between them and the United States. However, after their independence had culminated in a new constitution which outlawed slavery, the Anglos became very discontented with the new state. Meanwhile, many of these Anglo immigrants who were arriving in Texas from the south, such as Sam Houston and Davy Crockett, were doing so illegally. As documented in your first reading, The Conquest of Texas, these Anglo immigrants came with a conception known as the Texas Creed, or came with preconceived notions of settling Texas. They believed that their political institutions were superior to that of the Mexicanos, or the quote-unquote savage Indians. These men, such as Daniel Boone and Sam Houston, were to lead the independence movement in Texas in 1836, which was the year that Texas declared its independence and won its independence from Mexico.
I said, you all can go to hell. I'm going to Texas.
Although Texas had won the war, their borders were still in dispute. The Republic of Texas claimed that their borders reached all the way down to the Rio Grande, while Mexico claimed that their borders stretched up to the Neches River in what is present-day Texas. That stretch is known as the Valley today, or the Rio Grande Valley. At that time, it was populated almost purely by Tejanos. And above that, Anglos were the majority. At that time, the only reason why the river was wanted was because it was believed that it would connect and run a steamboat all the way up to Santa Fe. And this was before the time of railroads. Stephen F. Austin's cousin in 1834 actually tried to run a steamboat up the Rio Grande. This is when there was actually water in the Rio Grande. And he thought you could get a steamboat all the way up there and they could access the Santa Fe trade. That's why the shape of the state looks the way it does. By this time in the early 1840s, the idea of manifest destiny was in full swing within the United States. James K. Polk ran on the ticket of annexation of Texas and already had plans for the Mexican-American War. Shortly after annexing Texas, the United States Army moved its troops into what was disputed and largely believed to be Mexican territory and put those Mexican troops right across the Rio Grande River from Matamoros. There they waited months until finally a skirmish occurred between the Mexicans and the United States Army. One gringo officer was killed, and James Polk declared that a United States soldier was slain on United States soil. The resulting proclamation was war against Mexico and the beginning of the Mexican-American War. This war would be called by Senator Abraham Lincoln at the time one of the most unjust wars that would ever be fought by a powerful country against a weak one. The United States, once the treaty was signed in 1848, would take a portion of what would later become 12 total states from Mexico. From before the secession of Texas to after the secession of the rest of Mexico, Mexico lost 51% of its territory to the United States. This early history, the conquest of Texas and the violence that accompanied it, led to the creation of a unique Texas political culture. This political culture is due to not only our unique history, but also our geographic location within the United States. One aspect of this political culture is what is known as provincialism, or the tendency for those politicians from Texas to represent and pander to being from Texas. George W. Bush himself, after he lost his first election and his opponent ran on him being a Yankee, being an outsider, being born and educated in the Northeast, George W. Bush, after that election, said, "I'll never get out-Texaned again." And clearly you could see he filled up or lived up to that Texas persona through the rest of his time in office. Our desire as Texans to see common folk, common Texans in the office is one sign of our political culture. It's provincialism.
You'll be. Let me. I think tide turning. See, as I remember, I was raised in the desert, but tides kind of turn. It's easy to see a tide turn. Did I say those words? Yeah, I probably ought to then reflect on those words and think that I sense something different happening in Iraq. I think the Japanese people are going to like the taste of U.S. beef. Matter of fact, I had a good slice of beef last night. I can see Laura beginning to grimace a little bit. She said, he's getting awfully windy. It's a Texas term.
Your textbook on page 5 discusses 3 different types of political culture. Moralistic political culture, which emanates in New England and sees far more government involvement and citizen involvement in politics. We won't discuss in depth because we do not see it in Texas. The other 2 political cultures, individualistic and traditionalistic, we will. Individualistic political culture is the belief that government should limit its role to providing order in society so that citizens can pursue their economic self-interest. This political culture largely typifies West Texas. It typifies our politics in general, but West Texas and the west of the United States in general. This political culture, like all political cultures, has its roots in history and developed with the pioneers. The frontier spirit and the kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps that developed. That mentality didn't want big government interference and wanted things left to those men and women in small family units that were traveling west. And also in Texas, we have present traditionalistic political culture. Your book defines traditionalistic political culture as the belief that government should be dominated by political elites and guided by tradition. This political culture emanates in the Deep South, and although all of these political cultures are completely grounded in European American experience and ideology, this political culture especially is grounded in European American dominance and racism. The ideology comes from the South, and although the book dresses it up somewhat, this is a direct descendant of the slave and plantation economy. Okay, so what does this mean for Texas political culture? First of all, we believe in limited government. We do not have any kind of income tax in this state that's different than a lot of other states. We spend a lot less on social services. We have the largest number of uninsured in the country. We believe in letting people fend for themselves. Also, we have a history and tradition of racism within this country, or within this state, excuse me. We're very proud of our identity, and we identify with politicians who promote Texan pride and Texan themes. So the combination of these 2 dominant political cultures and others, as well as provincialism, is still relevant today to our politicians and the way they behave. You can watch this ad from Rick Perry and see strains of the Texas Creed, of Manifest Destiny, of American exceptionalism, right? A lot of these different subjects from the last 2 lectures that undergird this commercial or this campaign ad here.
I'm not ashamed to admit that I'm a Christian, but you don't need to be in the pew every Sunday to know that there's something wrong in this country when gays can serve openly in the military, but our kids can't openly celebrate Christmas or pray in school. As president, I'll end Obama's war on religion, and I'll fight against liberal attacks on our religious heritage. Faith made America.
So again, Texas sits at a unique geographic location. We're not totally in the South, but we're also not totally in the West. Fort Worth actually goes by the nickname of where the West begun. That's where a lot of the big cattle drives started in the West. If you look at a map of precipitation in the United States, annual rainfall, it somewhat mirrors the political culture, right? You can see the individualistic political culture out to the west, the traditionalistic political culture down south. As for Texas, our traditionalistic political culture is concentrated farthest east, where that first darkest green section is. That's where in Texas you find traditionalistic political culture, more of the deep south. As you move west and the rest of Texas looks like the west, that's where you see more individualistic strains throughout. Interesting note, right? If you look at this and look on the west where that political culture begins to change, right? Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, right? Those very liberal places, that actually also has more rainfall, right? Beyond that, if you look at a public lands map, right, you can also kind of chart where the West begins and somewhat of the political culture there by the public lands that were withheld, right? It's another way of defining the West. So we've talked about some political cultures, right? Two dominant ones supposedly in Texas, right? But there are many more, such as the Tejano political culture that exist. So obviously for your first critical writing, focusing on political culture, focusing on any aspect of the reading, early Texas history, historical comparisons, anything like that are all excellent topics to write on. Over the course of the weekend, if you want to email me any theses, ideas, introductory paragraphs, something like that, and let me know, I'll be more than happy to look it over. Your critical writings will be due at midnight on Monday. You can email them to me. I hope you all enjoyed these lectures, and feel free to email me with any feedback.